Live NFL trivia every Wednesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge for a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. It's every footballer's dream to do two things with their career. Number one, win a Super Bowl and hoist the Vince Lombardi trophy, getting a ring to show you're a world champion, and to show that you were on the best team in the league. But number two, and perhaps more important from an individual perspective, get into the Hall of Fame. Get inducted into Canton as one of the all-time greats. Get your bust, and be forever enshrined in NFL history. To be in the Hall of Fame, you have to be one of the best, and it is an absolute honor to be inducted and to be a part of history. And when the inductions happen, they take place right here, at Tom Benson Hall of Fame Stadium. The stage gets set up, and about 20,000 or so people will fill up the seats and the chairs on the field as they get to watch their heroes get immortalized, and get to watch the greatest to ever do it, talk about their career, share stories of their playing days, and thank everyone along the way who helped make this possible. But if you've watched the Hall of Fame inductions for a long time, you'll know that they weren't always at the stadium. It's only been like that for the past 20 some odd years. Because prior to 2002, the induction took place at a different place on campus. The induction took place at the steps right outside the hall. That raises the question, why did they stop doing that? Why did they move it from the iconic steps to a stadium? What was the catalyst that led to this decision? Well, you can thank this man right here for that. This is Buffalo Bills quarterback Jim Kelly. And of all the over 350 people to ever be inducted, perhaps none changed the course of the ceremony more than Kelly did. Because of Kelly, the induction now takes place at a stadium instead of the actual steps. And this is the story behind how Jim Kelly changed the Hall of Fame forever. Before I talk about what Kelly did during the ceremony that essentially forced the Hall's hand, we need some context to understand how the Hall of Fame induction process was before Jim Kelly came along, and how good of a player Kelly was. In 1963, the very first class of inductees into the Pro Football Hall of Fame was announced, and for nearly 40 years, from 1966 all the way up until 2001, the induction ceremony for these former players, coaches, and contributors took place on the steps of the Hall of Fame. The good news with having the ceremony on the steps was that it provided an incredible backdrop, as the exterior of the Hall of Fame is rather iconic. It also gives the families of the people getting inducted a fantastic seat, as they get to be right up close. Because the ceremony is taking place on the top step, and everyone starts lining up at the bottom step, and the gap between the top and the bottom step isn't too big, it allowed it to feel like a personal moment that the inductee got to share with their family. However, there was some bad news to having the ceremony on the steps that you might have been able to figure out. And that is the fact that the steps of the building aren't exactly designed to comfortably hold crowds of thousands of people at once. They don't exactly provide good sightlines unless you're up front. Now, if the Hall of Fame didn't get strong attendance, and if people didn't show up, this wouldn't be an issue. But this is the Pro Football Hall of Fame that we're talking about. And to say that crowds show up to this would be an understatement. In 1990, for instance, there were over 16,000 people lined up by the steps to watch the induction. Granted, it was a pretty stacked class full of great legends from established fan bases. It had Miami Dolphins quarterback Bob Greasy, Dallas Cowboys head coach Tom Landry, and Franco Harris and Jack Lambert from the Pittsburgh Steelers and their dynasty in the 1970s, just to name a few. Maybe this wasn't an issue back in the 1970s, with the 1974 ceremony, for instance, had a crowd of 8,000. But now in the 1990s, when the crowds were double that, and were routinely in the five-figure, 15,000 spectator range, it was starting to become a bit much. Here were just some of the problems with holding the ceremony on the steps. The crowds wrapped around the entire building. Not that you expect the need for heavy security at the Hall of Fame, but that is a lot of ground to cover, especially if there are crowds forming behind the building, where you can't see what's going on, and where there are tons of blind spots. It did pose somewhat of a safety concern, having the entire premises of the building surrounded on all sides and on all corners. It also raised the problem of people not being able to actually see the ceremony, even with binoculars. The last thing you want to do is have people show up to a ceremony where they can't see what's happening. Not just that, but they couldn't hear what was happening either, as the acoustics were not great the further back you went. Sure, having it on the steps was great if you could actually get close to the steps, but if you couldn't, you were straight out of luck, which could presumably lead to an unhappy fan experience, or could lead to a dangerous fan experience, as you try to push your way through the crowd to get closer and get a better vantage point. But let's talk about getting to the steps. Because if you weren't invited by a member of the Hall of Fame, the only way you were getting near the front of the steps was on a first-come, first-served basis. This led to people camping outside and arriving super early in the morning to make sure that they got prime real estate. Once again, this led to needing to pay for more personnel, like security and attendance, because with people showing up early, you need some stuff there to control things. It's not that having the ceremony on the steps was always a bad idea. It's just that with the popularity of the NFL and the Pro Football Hall of Fame, they completely outgrew that idea. And it was getting to a point where the only reason to keep the ceremony on the steps was because of tradition. However, for the executives running the Hall of Fame, despite all the downsides, that was a good enough reason to keep the ceremony on the steps. A big part of the Hall of Fame, and a big part of the mystique of any Hall of Fame, right or wrong, is tradition. It's why even though, according to Hall of Fame spokesman Pete Furley, they were toying with the idea of moving the ceremony from the steps to the stadium, they opted not to do this, because the tradition was too valuable and too important. And there were Hall of Famers that were absolutely adamant about keeping the ceremony on the steps, including former St. Louis Cardinals offensive lineman Dan Dierdorf, who grew up less than a mile away from the Hall of Fame, and was inducted in 1996 on the steps. As Dierdorf said, "I'm a traditionalist, so I'd like to see them stay on the steps." And the game plan for 2002 was the same as it was for 2001, which was the same as it was for 2000, which was the same as it was for 1999, which was the same as it was for every year going back to 1966. This once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the inductees was the same as it ever was. And then, Jim Kelly, one of the inductees in the class of 2002, did something that completely changed the Hall of Fame forever, and changed how every future ceremony would be conducted from this point on. In 2002, there were 5 people getting inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. You had the late head coach George Allen, who won 116 games and never had a losing record in his 12 seasons with Washington and the Los Angeles Rams. You had John Stallworth, the former Pittsburgh Steelers wide receiver who helped the team win 4 Super Bowls in the 1970s and made 3 Pro Bowls. You had tight end Dave Casper, maybe the best tight end of the 1970s, and a 5-time Pro Bowler who was a legend in every sense of the word with the Oakland Raiders. You had Dan Hampton, who played 12 seasons with the Bears, made 4 Pro Bowls, made the All-1980s first team, and was an anchor on the '85 Bears, maybe the greatest defense ever assembled. And then, as the headliner, you had this man right here. You had none other than Buffalo Bills quarterback Jim Kelly, one of the greatest players in the history of the franchise. He made it to 5 Pro Bowls, led the Bills to 4 straight Super Bowls from 1990 to 93 as the team's starting quarterback, and by the time he finished his career, his 237 passing touchdowns ranked inside the top 15 in NFL history, which is especially impressive considering the fact that he only started his career in 1986 due to spending time in the USFL before coming to Buffalo. Kelly is a team legend, and it was never a doubt that he was going to get into Canton. When you're the starting quarterback for 4 consecutive Super Bowls, something that was never done before and still has not been done, and when you're one of the best at your position, you're getting in. Combine that with the fact that he was a member of the Buffalo Bills, a team with a large and passionate fan base that's less than 4 hours away from Canton, and combine that with the fact that he played the most prominent position on the field at quarterback, meaning that he was going to get the most attention, and everyone knew that Kelly was going to draw a crowd. The expectation, and rightfully so, was that for Kelly's induction, Canton, Ohio, would turn into mini Buffalo. Still, the Hall of Fame was not budging. They had big players get inducted before, including guys way bigger and way more successful than Jim Kelly. They've had big players from the hometown Cleveland Browns get inducted before. And yet, the ceremony never left the steps. Nothing was going to change that. And that's when Kelly, whether it was completely intentional or unintentional, decided to take matters into his own hands. Because one of the beauties of the Hall of Fame back then was that if you were an inductee, you could invite whoever you wanted to the ceremony, and there was no cap on this number whatsoever. Theoretically, you could send out an unlimited number of invitations to people to get reserved seats and spots by the stage. Usually, these people will invite their family, their close friends, any longtime teammates of theirs, and any coaches and mentors that helped them get to this point. The guest list was a reasonable size, and even in 2001, when Mike Munchak got inducted and invited a record 400 guests, it was still doable. But Kelly wanted this moment to be shared with everyone. And when I said everyone, I mean everyone. If you were with him in Buffalo, he wanted you there. If you were with him in the USFL with the Houston Gamblers, he wanted you there. If you were with him at college down in Miami, he wanted you there. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that he didn't stop there. If you were a player or a coach with him in high school at East Brady, he wanted you there. If you were a part of his Pee Wee football team, I kid you not, he wanted you there. Combine all of that with Kelly's giant family, consisting of 5 brothers, who then presumably invited people themselves, and you had a list that surpassed that of Mike Munchak at 400. As Kelly said, he began putting his list together with all of his Pee Wee football coaches, and just went from there. And he never stopped. If Facebook existed back then, Kelly's the guy that holds a barbecue at his house, posts a Facebook event on it, and hits the invite all button. Because I don't just mean surpassed in the sense that he broke Munchak's record by a couple of people. I mean surpassed in the sense that he obliterated the record to the point where it might not be touchable. Because at the end of the day, Jim Kelly had a whopping 1,200 guests with him. That's triple the record. And keep in mind, that's just the number of people that said yes, because presumably, not every person who got invited said that they could make it. So think of how many invites he actually sent out. There were going to be 1,200 people who were there that personally knew Kelly, that Kelly wanted to have there. If I asked you right now to name 1,200 people that you personally know, odds are you couldn't do it. If you even have 1,200 contacts in your phone, I would be amazed. Kelly had 1,200 of his friends, family members, and mentors coming to watch him. So when you combine that absurdly high number with the other inductees who had people to invite, plus the number of people coming from out of town to watch their favorite players get inducted, especially from Buffalo due to the close proximity between the two cities, as more than 150 buses from Buffalo were set to arrive, plus the number of locals who like to go every year, and holding it at the steps became a completely impossible thing to try. As spokesman Pete Furley said on the decision to move the ceremony from the steps to the stadium in the wake of Kelly's crazy guest list, that kind of finalized it. It was an idea that the Hall had been toying with for years, but didn't want to mess with because of tradition. But Jim Kelly kind of forced their hand by inviting everyone that he knew. If there was ever a year to try it and see how it went, this was the year. And the ceremony was a resounding success. Fans were more comfortable, and the ceremony drew 17,700 people to Fawcett Stadium, which was a record. And after an experience like that, and after record-breaking crowds, yeah, you can't go back to the old way of doing things. It just wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. From that moment on, the Hall of Fame induction ceremony took place in the stadium, and has never taken place on the steps again. Nor do I ever think there will come a time where it takes place on the steps again. Those days, much like the tradition of holding the NFL draft at Radio City, are long gone. If you like this change, you can thank Jim Kelly. If you hate this change, you can curse Jim Kelly. But one thing is for certain, Jim Kelly changed the game forever, both on the field with his play, and off the field with his gigantic guest list that made the ceremony what we know and love today. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at Jaguar Gator 9. To see college football videos, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.